I'm Dr. Julie, and today we're talking to a few leaders from Bupa about success, failure, and well-being at work, starting with none other than Dr. Arun Thiyagarajan. So, Dr. Arun, you have this leadership role within Bupa, but you have a medical background. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, that's right, Julie. I joined Bupa back in 2019. And before that, I was very much a practicing physician. I worked as a GP and a general medic in a hospital. And I kind of fell into a job at Bupa. I got approached to be their medical director, and I was in charge of things like clinical medicine and clinical governance in our health clinics in the UK. After that, I took over the management of the business and so managed it from a sales marketing perspective, and it did really well also during the COVID time. And more recently, I'm in charge of transformation and healthcare transformation across the global footprint, which is really exciting. Not where I thought I'd be when I started practicing medicine, however many years ago that was. But yeah, really love it.
And I guess we're talking a bit about failure today. In that sort of leadership role, what does failure mean to you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I find the word failure really hard to adjust in my mind. I prefer to frame it in terms of like not yet, or because when I think of failure, or the word itself kind of feels a bit binary, like either yes, you've succeeded or no, you haven't. And I think that's a long way to look at it. So for me, it's like if something hasn't worked out, it's right. Okay, it's not working out right now, not yet. And maybe in the future it will. Maybe what do I need to do differently to make it work in the future? Or maybe do I need to have another look and maybe it's not what I want to do at all? So that's the kind of way I like to look at it.
Yeah, and from a psychological perspective, that's a great growth mindset. So the work of people like Carol Dweck, who talked about if you have a growth mindset, it's very much that sort of not yet. So you can fail as a part of success.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a fixed mindset, it's more a sense of I'm really good at this, but I'm no good at that, and I will never be. And so that growth mindset has that sense of with effort, I can improve. Is
Yeah.
it that sort of feel?
Yeah, I think I've seen a video of this experiment that Carol Dweck did actually on kids, where she kind of looked at like doing maths samples for kids, and there's some kids who got the answer right and some who didn't, and I think they told some certain batch of kids, they praised them for at least the effort, and then the others they praised them for getting it right or wrong, and those who were praised for the effort actually did fed better long term because they didn't have in their mind the fact that you can either be right or wrong. And the process of that is kind of, working towards it. So, everything you do is kind of a step in the right direction. I think does that sound familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of rewarding effort rather than results enables people to kind of work harder and perform better and bounce back after failure and those kind of things. So being aware of that sort of work, has that impacted on the way that you deal with your teams and things at work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, when I manage my teams, the way we kind of look at things is what is it that we need to do to try and improve? And if we fail, it's only a step in the journey. And how do we iterate and change? And sometimes actually, you've heard this phrase that's very overused, like failing fast. But it's actually quite relevant and important because as long as you fail fast and you learn from it, you can actually get to your destination quicker. That's the kind of thing that I try and talk to my teams about, and we work on that together. And I think it's worked relatively well in the past.
Yeah. And how have you sort of learnt from your own failures?
Yeah. So I've had loads of personal failures and in both in work and things and ideas that haven't worked out, but also, all the way through my academic career. When I started at med school, I found it really hard to adjust from school to university. I kind of was quite complacent. I socialized too much. I kind of didn't study. And I remember flunking my first year exams and I had to resit them. And for me, that was a real shock. I mean, having a relatively strong academic background before that, and you come into this pool of people who are highly successful and highly motivated, and then you kind of don't do as well as you think you would. And I think that was my first kind of taste of not working out, and I had to adjust that. And to do that, I think for me, it was a bit of a journey, a mental journey to realize, okay, so what is it that led me to that point in the first place, and how is it I'm going to change? And I had to do that really quickly because if you failed at your resit, you were chucked out, which thankfully I wasn't. So
For you.
otherwise, I wouldn't be here today, probably.
But there's a really kind of inspiring story in there, isn't there? That you experienced this failure and you kept going and kept working, and here you are today doing really exciting things in a really exciting environment. And for anyone in that position at university at the moment, you can get those sorts of feelings that nothing will ever work out for me, or there's no way I could be a success if this has happened to me. But you sort of learn from that experience.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly right, because I mean, med school is a long time. You spend 5 or sometimes 6 years at university, and so you kind of really have to get to know yourself, because you've got exams all the way through. You've got to, you've got to pass them, otherwise you don't get progress. So in that respect, it does kind of put upon you the feeling of either success or not, which is again, going back to what I was saying earlier, not necessarily the right way to think about it, but unfortunately the system pushes that on you. And it's about how you respond to that as an individual. So even though there might be exterior individuals or organizations or systems that are telling you, okay, you're doing well or not, I think it's about how you kind of compartmentalize that in your own head and work towards your own future. And your success in your eyes is the most important thing.
Yeah. And there's something about getting through those sorts of failures in which you need to kind of separate your sense of self-worth from the event itself, or the mistake or the setback. And do you feel able to do that when you have, setbacks or failures at work, or even when you go back to those sort of university experiences?
Yeah.
Were you able to hold on to that sense of self-worth so that you could continue your efforts?
Yeah, I think so. So I think to redefine in your own head, or that's what we try and do in my team, is to redefine what we think is success. So our CEO, Iñaki, actually has this principle of the fact that counting how many failures or perceived failures that we've had, and actually counts that as a success in itself. So the more, that kind of proxy measure of how much you've tried. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because it reinforces the idea that the more you try, eventually you'll get to a place where you are successful. I think, it's the same with startup businesses, for example. I think you see a lot of people who've been successful in startup businesses, but before that, they've had like 9 failed attempts. And usually it's quite proportional. So I think that same thing you can relay to whether that's at work, whether that's your exercise endeavors and losing weight, or whether that is, making sure you're reinforcing friendships with friendships in your social circle, whatever that might be. I think the same principle of putting the effort in, and even if you don't succeed, keep going.
So the consequences of failure, particularly in a medical setting and a healthcare setting, can be devastating. So how do you look after yourself in that kind of working in that kind of environment?
Yeah. Well, I found it really difficult to adjust the first time I was working on the wards and seeing people pass away, especially people you'd cared for weeks on end. And mentally, I had to adjust to that. And I remember at the time speaking to my senior colleagues, and for them, obviously, they'd been through that. So it wasn't that they were immune to it, but it was they had worked out a way of compartmentalizing that in their head. And I think just with experience, I managed to do that more often. To look after myself as well, I think is really important from a mental and physical perspective. Now I'm very kind of particular about diarising time to do exercise, because otherwise it doesn't happen. So in between doing a nursery run or going to work or seeing family on the weekends, it's really easy to get lost. And so I try and put it in the diary. So I make sure and do that roughly 2 or 3 times a week, which I think is, for me is great. And mentally, I think just taking some time out, whether that be reading or talking to friends or seeing family, I think that helps me kind of process what's happened in the week. And I do that a lot, actually, more towards the end of the week. So that kind of gives me the time to try and work out, okay, so that happened. How do I feel about that? So I think whatever works for you is really important to try and adjust it, iterate, and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think we underestimate the power of some of those simple things because we see them as sort of not complex enough, or we're not having to pay for them, so they can't have much of an impact. But actually doing those things on a regular basis kind of creates that foundation. I guess then you're more able to deal with the things that come your way.
Yeah.
So I've got an example. My son is in a football team, and his coach recently, they win a lot, and his coach recently put them against a team that's a year older than them so that they could experience losing. And he really sort of recognized the value of experiencing failure and being able to come back from that and learn from the experience. Have you got any examples of when you've really learned from setbacks or failure and how you use that within, your teams?
Yeah. So in the workplace, I think I'm actually going to rewind to a couple of years ago when COVID started. And I say in terms of the fact that we were, and at the time I was in charge of the health clinics business. And so we were in the position of providing health to a lot of people in a time when the health system was really struggling. And I think rather than a kind of our own failure as a nation, we were in some sense failing everyone in terms of the fact that we weren't getting tests out to people when they needed to. People in care homes were struggling across the board, across the country. And I remember our attitude internally towards that was to look at it in terms of, okay, well, let's change our risk appetite and make sure that we can provide what we need to the people that we can. And that really helped actually, because we started to get involved in COVID testing, and we supported a lot of other organizations in delivery of tests, even the government at one point. And that turned around to be a massive success for us because we adjusted, we realized that we have to change the way we look towards risk. And now was the time towards being a bit more daring and accepting some risk because we just had to. Most importantly for our patients and our customers, but also for the business as well. So we had to adjust how we accepted risk. And I think doing that, meaning that we were more accommodating of it and taking more risk, helped a lot. And it kind of merges into the growth mindset idea. It was really helpful for us as a business and also helped a lot of people that we serve.
When have you sort of felt that you've had the best relationship with failure in that sense?
I think for me, my relationship with it not succeeding or failure has been best when someone has given me the permission to fail. And it's almost like giving you that, allowing you the freedom mentally to know that if it doesn't work out, that's fine. So when I've had managers in the past or peers who've said, actually, why don't we try this? And if it flunks, it's fine. It doesn't matter. We've got time to change it. Or actually, even if it flunks, we're going to learn ABC and then we can use that to make sure that the next round is successful. That's when I think it's worked out the best. So almost thinking of the first try as a trial. And if it doesn't work out, change. And that's all good. That's when I think it's worked out the best.
And how does that work now that you're in, a leadership role and lots of people are looking to you to establish what is the culture in our working environment? It's also quite difficult when you're in those roles to be open and sort of be a good role model for that attitude towards failure, isn't it? Because I guess it's difficult to share when you've made mistakes or had setbacks, but that is the culture you want to have. I mean, how do you manage that one?
So I think practicing what you preach is really important. So as I said earlier, my managers in the past have allowed me or given permission for something not to work out and said that it's okay if it doesn't work out. I've tried to do that the same with my team. So telling them about past failures or things that haven't worked out are really important because it almost indirectly gives them permission to try something. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. Pause, hit the pause button, start again.
And sometimes those things can be more inspiring because people see that you are succeeding in your role and you're doing brilliant things. And so hearing about failures or setbacks along the way makes people think even more of you or inspires them to know that you can fail and still achieve along the way.
I think that's exactly right. And the other thing I've said to my team is when something doesn't work out, actually, even the way you talk about it is really important, whether that's to yourself or to your peers or externally. It's the framing. So it didn't work out, but you know what? We learned this, and that's really helpful for what we're doing next. And it didn't work out. This didn't quite land where we want to, and then put a positive spin. And I think the narrative, changing that narrative around it has been really useful. I think that's another technique that's worked really well.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the AI research and how when you put a computer against a human being and set them the same challenge, every attempt that a computer makes to solve a problem is just called a sample. So it's just one sample. And if that sample's not the way, they try another sample and another sample. And at no point does that computer start to question its self-worth as a computer or its ability to solve the problem. It just keeps on trying. And so when we have that new relationship with failure and that it's just another sample, it's just another attempt, and then we go again and we learn from it, then we can kind of keep going. Arun, thank you for today, and thanks for sharing your insights and your own personal experiences with failure, which is not easy to do. I think lots of people will get lots of inspiration from that, so thanks very much.